present you William Coleman, who is, I should start, of course, first of all, a viola player, member of the Kuss Quartet, professor at the Mozart in Salzburg for viola and chamber music, and also conductor. So I always wondered how it is to have a conductor in a string quartet.
That's coming in the fifth paragraph later on.
Right. So, I'm responsible for the sound stuff, so I'll do my very best. Please, William.
Thank you. It's very nice to be in a room that I think is full of quartet players. Is that right? How many? Is there anyone who isn't in a quartet? You're a pianist, you lucky thing. Okay. I think it would be lovely to also, if I'm allowed, to ask you questions, also in such a way that I can figure out how we go along during the talk, just to find as much relevance as possible. It's a bit of a spider's web, in terms of, if you want to talk about being in a quartet, as you all know, except for the pianist, it's complicated. It's a subject matter which, well, this talk is planned for 5 hours, as long as that's okay with you. It's a spider's web of skill, of course, interpretation of a lot of passion, a lot of dedication, of craft, and of psychology. And I think all quartet players should be, every conservatoire should grant free psychology, psychology time. But as you probably have all discovered so far, it's about those human relationships. And so I've split our time together into a few sections, and I think it's the first I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on is, why are we doing this? And I think that when we are studying, when we're young, the why of the quartet, going further and deeper into these great pieces, is something that you have to do with such an with such idealism, with such love, that it makes it, that it burns its imprint onto you, that in a way that then can carry you through later, more difficult times. And I thought it'd actually be interesting to have this talk with 3 people, with someone who's been in a quartet for 1 year, someone who's been in a quartet for 20 years, and someone who's been in a quartet for 40 years. Because the journey, like with every relationship, is changing constantly, and it's fascinating. But firstly, let's go to the why do we do this? Beethoven said, "I'd rather write 10,000 notes than a single letter." And so I think we should just follow that example and just listen for 2 minutes, for one minute and a half, to something from 59, number 2. So I think that's one of the reasons why we do this. Apparently, Czerny, a student and friend really of Beethoven, he said that that was inspired by a contemplation of the starry firmament and the music of the spheres. And there's this sense when the second violin and the viola come in, and then that dotted trochaic rhythm on top in the first violin, they come in, it's this sense of joining hands, and this sort of brotherhood, this sense of being together, of community, and just seeing the stars. And I think that's, if we keep that image in our heads, that's something that I feel is so central to Beethoven's motivation, this idea of mankind. There's an ideology there, there's a striving for something better, constantly. He was alienated from society at this point. It was 1808. His deafness was alienating him. He was sort of almost like a hermit, really, in his living. And his artistic mission was really, he was conscious of transcending physical, our day-to-day world, and striving, as I say, for something better. Let's listen now to something completely different, and it's the opening of Beethoven's very final quartet, Opus 135. Is profound, and this is full of humour. It's earthbound, and he's reveling in something that is so human, the ability to laugh, the ability to shrug your shoulders, and to view the world with all its faults with a sort of an acceptance. And I think somewhere between these two poles is wisdom. And I remember we were studying Opus 130, and the third movement, it begins with incredible depth and sort of darkness and pulling at your heartstrings of suffering semitones, and then it goes into something incredibly silly. It's a clock ticking, it's a child laughing. And I remember asking our teacher at the time, Eberhard Feltz, how is that possible? How could you put those two things together? And I was desperate for a story. I wanted a story that I could understand, that bridged over the whole movement. And he said, that's wisdom. That ability, as I say, for an older man who's experienced everything, to be able to shrug his shoulders. And we, you, young people, of course, we want something logical that we can make sense of, and with age, with wisdom, I think we all begin to understand that life is there are so many layers to it, and I think this music teaches us. I think if we have an open ear and an open mind, we can learn how to behave and how to think. I think it can be. I certainly notice as the years go by, with this music accompanying me, there are always these moments every so often where I think, okay, I think I've seen something in human nature, and this music can teach us. So let's move on. We're all here because of our fascination for string quartets and our ability to interact with each other. And I think the psychology of interaction between players is something that you all are aware of, want to know more about, and want to find how do we marry problems and wonderful things, but also problems, how do we marry that into our interpretation? So, how would you describe the relationship of your quartet? There are people burying their heads.
fire and there is water afterwards.
What's
and
the water?
And there is a friendship going on in between.
What's the water?
It's the, I think, after the fire there must be, when there is a fire there must be someone who will put it up, put it down.
Yeah. Is it okay? Is it always the same person? No.
No.
The voice of reason in your quartet is changing.
No. It's, I would say it's always in between the rehearsals that this water comes and then.
And do you cure your problems in the rehearsals or after the rehearsals?
Well,
It's always changing. I knew an Israeli quartet, and they had a rule that they weren't, if they had an argument, they weren't allowed to leave the room until the argument had been resolved. I just thought that's okay. Well, good luck, guys. What about you? What's the relationship of your quartet like? What are the joys and frustrations about your quartet?
Yeah. Well, I think now it's in fact already the third new version of the quartet. So with Lotte, I'm now playing already for 1 year in string quartet, and we are now having our third edition. And I would say that for me at least, the most important is that we stay also listening towards each other and making sure that everyone is feeling comfortable. So in a way it's maybe also after rehearsals, then when there is a conversation with each other, like how is your life and what do you bring from that into our rehearsal, that's maybe for me at least more important than actually the work or something, because I think this influence is so big and powerful.
It's such a fine line, isn't it? It seems already with those two comments, it seems like the music is why we do it, but it's not always the music that heals us. It seems like it's the human psychology that has to find its way, that you find each other again in service of this music. I wonder, for me, sometimes the water that you described that puts out that fire is simply a good concert. It's that moment when that movement of 59-2 begins and everything is forgiven. I think we play this music, which is the most celestial, most inspired music, but somehow how we talk to each other and rehearse is really mundane. It's really down to earth. We don't, and sometimes I think it's quite easy to forget, hold on, this is so much bigger, and what are we fighting about here? So that ability for someone to be able to step back and say, guys, we're arguing on a lower level than we need to be. That's something, that as part of the daily life of a quartet, I think. And I think it should be said that when you're in your 20s, as I think you all are, this is the period in your life where you're finding your voice, where you're learning and you're finding your voice, you're finding your opinions, and you should be fighting. Don't forget that also. It's good to fight and to work out, does this work? Are my opinions, do I have something to say, and is it valuable? And then to adjust. And it's later, then when you're maybe in your 40s or something, after 20 years or so, that the mellowing of age has a positive effect, I think, on your forgiveness of each other. But that battle at the beginning, I think, is a very, very important. How you deal with the battle, let's hope that it's not a fatal battle. But don't forget, you have that responsibility to find a voice and stay true to yourself. So that's a huge subject, all those things that I've just said. But we can come back. I think it's really also good to acknowledge that we're fascinated by quartets. and so was Beethoven, and so was Mozart, and so was Haydn. And it's some of the most experimental writing, it's some of the most nakedly pure writing, and I think that's also why we feel so sensitive, because we're connected through the ages back to Beethoven, and he's pushing us, and we know that it's something far more personal, let's say, than his symphonic writing, far more experimental than his symphonic writing, and that there was no quartet written by Haydn that was the same as the one before. He always had a new joke, he always had a new technique, constant experimentation. So that's something for us to think about. I wanted to begin with Beethoven because the music itself has, as its underlying an absolutely constant motivation, contemplations about humans, about human nature and the world that we live in. And I just wanted to take a moment to ask you, what do you think? Do you think, from what we've been talking about so far, do you think that where do you think Mozart is on that front? In terms of how personally we feel it and what he was striving to do. Yes.
You mean today?
For you,
Okay.
or what you think, when you think of Mozart, the first things that come into your mind. When I think of Beethoven, those are the first things that come into my
Yes.
mind.
For me, is something happy, something, let's say, for sure not introvert, because for me this beginning of Beethoven was something deep, introvert, and maybe a little silly. I mean, that's my
Hopefully.
general, I know, if I think about Mozart. But also in the same way, extremely well composed. I'm also a composer. That's
Yeah.
why I look at, from this side also for some piece.
Yes.
So happiness, no doubts, let's say, and good Werkstatt.
And how did he think about, I don't know, what did Mozart think about human beings? I mean, how was he dealing? Beethoven, I think, had this incredible sense of idealism, this idea that humans should always strive to become better, and an incredible moral code. And I just wondered if you thought, what you thought in terms of Mozart, whether he has also this moral code.
I think personally that Mozart didn't care
About what?
about humanism and like maybe I think that maybe the Mozart like a composer was like the extremely different version of Mozart. Like I would not connect these facts because of course we can connect that like happiness that we can find it in the pieces, like a lot of like happiness, that like enjoyment, but maybe it was the solution for him to find the real how to say it, the real personality.
I think I know where you're going. And one last question. Did Pergolesi do this in his writing? Did he write and think about the individual person?
Pergolesi? Yeah, probably. But I think as Mozart, religion was really important in their lives, and the link between moral and religion, and we really see it like in Mozart's Requiem or Pergolesi.
Salvat Mater.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I just like to sort of jump a little bit back through the ages, just because I think it's good to remind ourselves. Nothing I'm saying is new to you, but it's good to maybe remind ourselves. You know, Bach, who did he serve? What was his motivation? He was deeply religious, and I think in this modern world that we live in, we don't have to be religious, but when we play Bach, somehow we become believers. Somehow we have faith. Somehow we become connected with his world, because he was writing for the church, and that's not necessarily the church as an institution, although practically, of course, that was true, but he was writing for communities. These incredible churches that were built for the community. This music was there to serve God and to be shared by the community. But the church was paying the bills. And Mozart, the aristocracy, he was still in service of the aristocracy, and he poked at them. He made fun of them, he pointed out the ridiculous nature of them, and he went very close, dangerously close, in terms of what was morally acceptable. What could you depict? When you imagine Barberina, gosh, if you imagine, Figaro and Don Giovanni in the theatres, this is going very close to problematic areas for censors and things. And Beethoven was the first freelancer. He was the first one who, no, I'm not in service of the aristocrats. I don't serve the church. And I think it's good for us to realize that, and just to remind ourselves, he was the first sort of romantic, in a certain sense, the first one to say, it's me. I am mankind being at the center of the universe, not God, not the aristocrats employing me, but I, the artist. And that shift in ego, that shift in identity, I think really, really changes also how we perceive his music. That he was walking with Goethe, and the emperor came by, and this famous story, you all know it, and Goethe bowed, and Beethoven turned to him and said, "Shame on you! How can you bow to the emperor? This man has, we too have more value in our little fingers. We have more talent and more creativity than all of the generations of his family. He has nothing, he's not deserved it." And that, I think, is an incredibly good little anecdote, picture into how he thought, and about creativity as the ultimate, as the center of the universe, really. So Mozart, he didn't judge people at all. I love that in his operas. For all of mankind's faults, he doesn't judge anyone. It's very real. People are unfaithful, people are manipulative, but he doesn't judge them. And I think that's important. For instance, Beethoven didn't like the Da Ponte operas. He was wary of them. I think he knew that they were extraordinary pieces, but he was wary of them for moral reasons. He always thought that we should be striving for better things, and I think he felt uncomfortable with the fact that Mozart acknowledged that everything in life is somehow acceptable. It's part of how humans work. And we love Mozart for that, of course. Now, I wanted to ask, when you hear that music, the 59-2, what does it make, how does it make, do you have pictures and images that come into your mind? And I think it's an important question, yes.
Just
the slow movement, the slow one at the beginning, yeah.
The pictures that come to my mind. Oh, that's a difficult
Or anyone.
I feel it, for example, more not like a picture, but more like emotion coming to my head or heart, like kind of warmth.
Yes.
Like, or for example, about the picture. Like, I don't have a really concrete picture, but it's for me like something that is like less and less covered. For example, like something is just flowing into something, like this kind of.
I think.
Or discovering something.
Yes.
Like more and more, but this is for me.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that? Because it's an incredible moment. The very first second you hear that note, that pure E natural.
It happens for me sometimes when I listen to Beethoven music, especially the slow movements of violin concerto or symphonies or this quartet, that I feel I also have no like landscape or whatever in my head, but more like I feel comfortable. Like when the middle voices start to add the counterpoint, I catch myself, okay, yeah, it's maybe hard to be together. So I also think about this, let's say, technical stuff, but don't think about it. Don't think about it. Stay with this calmless, comfortable, calmfully atmosphere, and I don't know, I sink in it.
Yeah.
And it happens to me a lot of times with this kind of music that I don't think. I became like, I can't think. I just feel this. I know. It's not clear for you.
Well, this is the reason I ask. I think everything you've said is totally valid, and I think one of the beauties of music is that everyone in this room can feel slightly different. It's a universal language that allows us that freedom, and that leads me to the idea of how do we decodify, how do we uncover these scores, and how do we put that for 4 people? How do we do that? You know, how do we interpret and put something together? And I know that later there's a round table where there were certain questions about the idea of compromise within quartets, and the idea of, you know, how much should individuals compromise or force through ideas, etc., etc. But I think it's incredibly useful to firstly try and get yourselves onto the same page as each other. And the people have very different ideas about interpretation, but to find out what is your process. And for instance, something like that, is it good maybe to have a conversation, not just about the technical things that you mentioned, but hold on, what's the bigger force field here? And I think you didn't feel comfortable maybe having a specific picture in your mind, which is absolutely fine. But we can try and become the music. We can try and be the music. And part of that process is what does A flat major, what does E major do to me? And you were talking about a certain warmth that comes over you, a certain comfort and yes, comfort really. You can speak in terms of, well, is it a man or a woman singing, speaking? Is that man or woman 20 years old, 40 years old, or 70 years old? Who is he speaking to? Is this first person or is it third person? Is it the Tosca suffering and crying out the pain and I am dying? Or is it that we are seeing, that we're sitting outside and that we're seeing something unfold? How involved are we in this? And that's very often the difference between certain Baroque music and later Romantic music. The Baroque music, we very often, it's not me who's dying. I'm experiencing and seeing something. And later on, I'm going to be singing and dying for 20 minutes, you know, of tuberculosis normally. But those categories of bringing yourself onto the same page, and I wanted to ask someone in a quartet, when you do have an argument, have you noticed, or disagreement, whatever, what is it that normally you're disagreeing on? Are there patterns about where your problems arise? I don't know, someone in the back row. Well, this is exactly my question. What is it that comes up mostly in your talks?
A nuance, maybe, which you don't agree.
A nuance in terms of timing or of color or. Is it unsure? You're unsure what you argue about mostly. That's fine.
Well, sometimes we have different ideas, different musical ideas. We play together. But then we just try it out, and usually we hear what we prefer, and then we go on.
Wow, great. Gosh, you're lucky. That's very rare, I think. I think that's the beginning of every argument. Well, I think it's very... I remember when we were in our 20s, I remember there were heated arguments. I mean, I remember a door being slammed and people storming out, and there was one phase where the cellist decided not to speak for 3 days. You know, I mean, incredibly, the things you only do in your 20s, or earlier even. And I felt at that moment, my goodness, something needs to change, because we are four very different people, but I wouldn't want to change that fact. For instance, I think it's quite often the case, I hear more and more about young quartets nowadays, where there's a personnel change, and it's been that 3 people have thrown somebody out. And my generation, we were brought up with a few golden rules. One was slightly what you described, which was very pragmatic day to day. You try everything. Someone makes a suggestion, you try it. You don't discuss. You just try. No comments. And another golden rule is that 3 people never throw one person out, ever. And a golden rule is that you don't threaten to leave a quartet. It's a nuclear bomb that you do not bring to the table, ever. If you do that, it's done, it's finished. Because there's immediately a breakdown of trust. And I see this very many times, that when 3 people, it leaves me with such a terrible feeling, when 3 people throw somebody out. There's always, the sort of the black sheep of the family, and someone gets thrown out. And I sort of put my head in my hands and think, God, this poor person who got thrown out. And it never works subsequently. Everyone thinks, oh, we'll change that person and then we will be so happy. But those 3 people know that it's possible to throw somebody out. And suddenly the entire dynamic in your subconscious has been destroyed. All the trust is gone. So those kind of golden rules, I was definitely brought up like that, and I can only recommend that you hold those things.
Can I have one question about the topic?
About?
Can I have one question about the topic? For example, so do you think is it better to just, when, like for example, there is a quartet and 3 people think like if throwing one person away will be better, do you think that it's actually the end of the quartet? Like they should stop?
No, I think you should fight. Don't get divorced immediately. What's wrong? Fight for it. You know, of course every single situation is different.
Yeah.
There are certain things which are very, very serious, and that you don't wish on anyone. But in terms of normal human relationships, the ups and downs, there's something, the long arc really. That there's something I know, for instance, after 20 years. I'm sure Guy would have a lot to say as well later. The things that I used to think of as being mortal sins and failures, and how could this person say that, and why does this person play like that? We all know very quickly what our strengths and weaknesses are, and I think that's one of the great skills in life, is to be able to see yourself objectively. It's very difficult, but to be able to actually sit back and say, okay, hold on, Yes, you think you're wonderful at this. Yes, this seems to be working okay. But what are your faults? What am I, when I'm putting the blame on somebody else, what am I actually, where do I need to work on myself? And also, those things that, as I spoke about, for individuals in the quartet who are very different, that's exciting. You don't want, you be careful what you wish for. Sometimes you want simple agreement. Is that good? Genuinely. Or is that rubbing of opinion and personality difficult and stressful and tiring, but ultimately a battle that over the years is worth fighting for? And I think you also have to remember that you change as a person. You become more forgiving. You're able to see someone's good qualities and grudgingly acknowledge that they're much better at that than you are. All the different skills and human interactions. There's an Amish saying that you have to work as if you had 1,000 hours, but also as if you only had that very day, that was your last day. So, and I think that's quite relevant somehow for quartets, because the idea of working for 1,000 hours, the idea of patience, the idea of integrity, of going deeper, of re-questioning. But I've only got one day to do it. And that urgency that goes with that. So that's something I think that also is very good for us to think about. When we think about interpretation, and we're trying to get everyone onto the same page, so that even if you're four very separate people, different people, that you can find common ground. Does anyone have any idea about what are the things how could we bring people on to the same page? What are the things that you have to agree on when you're rehearsing a piece for the first time? What are some of the sort of the basics that come up?
Dynamics, for example.
Dynamics, okay. Okay.
What tempo we are start reading.
Well, I think tempo is a big thing, isn't it? I find, someone simply wants something faster and shallower, and another person wants it slower and deeper. And God bless them both. But how on earth do you dance together without stepping on each other's toes? And what's the process? Aha, okay, hold on. We are so different. How on earth are we going to do this? And I think one aspect to think about is rhythm. I think this is, in terms of tempo. And how do we find rhythm? And I think we're, everyone here is slightly older and more experienced, I suspect. So it's going to be rare that you put a metronome on and find very much information from the metronome. Until the day that you make me a metronome that understands F minor and B flat major, a metronome has its real limitations. But the idea of tempo, there's a lovely idea that, for instance, in Western medicine, when doctors take your pulse, it's a number. It's simple as that. It's a number, and that's the end of the conversation. And whereas in Eastern medicine, they talk about not only how quickly it goes, but they have a concept of describing it, the type of pulse. And there's one that they describe as with a jumping characteristic, lively and jumping, slow and another character word, and of course that gives us so much more information. So when we're thinking about tempo, if we're thinking in terms of numbers, we have to be very careful, and maybe that's an area where we can borrow from medicine and say, okay, it's 66, joyful. It's leaping joyfully, it's treading carefully, it's funereal, it's 47 and heavy with tiredness, It's 47, but full of dignified sorrow. There are so many different ways of feeling time, but in a descriptive way that is maybe more useful. People also talk about what shoes you're wearing when you walk. Are you wearing hard wooden clogs? Is this some folk music with hard edges? Are you treading carefully? Are the soles of your shoes soft, as I say, or hard? Part of getting yourself onto the same page as a quartet, as I mentioned earlier, male or female, how old, naive or wise. These broad characteristics which actually give leeway. You can be naive but still there's still lots of flexibility in terms of sound and tempo. But maybe that already paints a picture in your head that is useful and brings you together. There's also an idea which I think is crucial about what's the purpose of rehearsing. Is the hope that we will fix our performance, fix our interpretation now so that we feel safe and comfortable to go on stage. We've fixed our ensemble playing, we've fixed our intonation, and now we can go and play the concert. And of course, how I'm saying this, you can tell there are worries about that. How much can you fix a living organism? If the piece of music is a breathing, moving, living thing. So, how do you do that in your quartet? Where do you stand? How do you talk about that?
Well, I guess that we as being students and still depending on exams and our grades and the fact that we have next week a lesson, are making that we are most of the time taking care of our pieces and also our playing in quartet is like an object, something that we can stick. Like we discuss interpretation, let's try it a few times, we want to have this idea, okay, let's go for it. And I guess that time in general and the beauty of music is persuading us to not see a rehearsal as a place where we have to build a statue, but somehow making sure that we are prepared that everything can happen on the stage.
Aha. But that's a
big difference. And
that's a huge job.
What is it?
It's a huge task. I mean, that's an incredible achievement if you're...
Yeah, at least for me it was something that I learned. Because before I was very used and also maybe a bit addicted to have something that I could control and that was in my hands. And I guess that for me now rehearsing is more like being prepared for the inspiration that will come.
And can you describe the process to have got there, practically speaking?
Well, that's still, I think we're still searching for that, of course, and the perfect solution for that will be never, I don't think it exists, like the perfect way of working towards that. But, like, at first, working with this objective parameters of tempo and dynamics and so on, and it's something like for the first few weeks, and then it's maybe for me, at least I try to play them more without the score and just by talking towards each other by the music. So I guess in this way of working, by being more conscious and more trying to listen precisely towards the others, that other characters and other shadows of a piece can appear, and by that the more interpretations are build up or something.
There's a very important... I think it's beautiful what you're describing. There was a very important pianist, Rudolf Serkin, who he said he would always look as experiment and see what shadow, what shade, what depth, what light, what speed, what inner pace of breathing, what kind of liveliness, all of the different possibilities that he could imagine in terms of the interpretation. And then when he walked onto stage, played as if there was only one way possible. And it was sort of life and death. And I think that kind of integrity to something, that's really I think that's something that we can all aspire to. I fear, Guy was saying earlier, that modern life and time limitations has we all have to be, I think, very careful not to fall into a trap that, oh, we don't have time, we have a lesson tomorrow, let's get this in tune. Of course, there are certain things, practically speaking, yes, it should be in tune. But to limit yourselves, and I remember we played the Beethoven cycle. In 2019, we played the entire cycle, and it was the first time. We'd always said no. We'd always thought, we always said among ourselves, no, let's not try to do that. Let's not push for that. It felt like a marathon, or it felt almost like it sounds terrible, but it almost felt like a circus thing, a sort of challenge for the sake of doing it. And then we were asked in 2019, and somehow the timing was right. We just thought, we all looked at each other and thought, sure, this feels, yes, let's do it. So, and then we stupidly said, let's record them live, all of them. And so the cycle was in Japan, it was in Tokyo, in Suntory Hall. And we said, let's put them onto disc, and we'll do it live. We knew that if we wanted to record the entire cycle in the studio, it would take months and years. The organization, time factors, days and days and days and days and days. So we thought this might be something very exciting. And also it's not done very often live, and so something special might happen. And I remember, though, we were very aware, we were having these conversations, well, how's this going to feel in the space of 14 days playing all of these pieces? And it changed our attitude, because it was so obvious there's no way that we'll be able to agree to take this much time here, take this much time there, that color close to the bridge there. I mean, it's impossible. It's too much. No human brain could produce this. Or if you did, you would feel like a machine. And none of us, I think it goes against human nature to want to feel like a machine. So we thought, well, what do we do? And so we started experimenting, and we really firstly sort of gave ourselves we gave ourselves the rule, nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong. There are no mistakes. So if you feel a burst of energy and you want to take the quartet with you, as long as you do it with your arms held out to take everyone with you, and you signal fair warning, then do it. And we will, as long as someone wants to do something, go with them. And because it's very easy for quartets sometimes to fall into a neutral interpretation, a neutral energy of agreed interpretation. So we started throwing the ball around musically, provoking each other. And the basic rule was, if you're not doing something, if you're not provoking or reacting to a provocation, there's something wrong here, and we have to stop. So sometimes the comment would come, something wasn't very well together, and the comment came, well, yeah, but you didn't have conviction with that. Let's try something else. And we would try passages multiple times, seeing how really, genuinely seeing, spontaneously, where not a sort of half spontaneous, agreed thing, but genuinely. And coming up with, and then not deciding. And that was also our rule, don't decide. Okay, after so many years of saying, yes, we basically agree that this should relax in tempo at this moment, we decided, no, let's not. It's dangerous, because we won't be able to play together unless we're constantly on high alert, the alarm bells ringing. And that was, that changed our lives as quartets, a true spontaneity, because it also developed an amazing sense of trust. If you take away if you have a rule, nothing is wrong, just make sure you do something and mean it, speak something, then if that's the only regulation, so to speak, you've already entered into a very non-judgmental world. You've already basically said everything is possible, and that was exciting. That didn't have conviction. Let's do it some other way. So that, and this is something that I think we couldn't have done. I'm not sure, actually. I shouldn't say that. It might be possible to do that, or at your age. I don't know whether. I don't know whether that's something that you need lots of experience. I would like to think it's not necessary. I would like to think you could just provoke and experiment and find your way. But that idea of building trust, musically, non-judgmentally, that was very important. Fine. Is there anything else that we should talk about? I think I've wanted to try and remind us that at the center of this web of complexity are extraordinary pieces that pull at our heartstrings, that teach us how to be. I mean, in normal life, let's face it, it's very boring. Shopping at the supermarket, my God. And there was a situation I remember once in a rehearsal of ours where we were doing the last movement of Mozart Dissonance Quartet, C major, and it's one operatic scene after another, and there's always another scene, and you think, my God, where's this material coming from? How is this possible? And very quickly you start imagining, I'm now 40 years old, a little stupid, very fat, and so good-natured. I've got big red cheeks, and this low voice, because I just hear it that way. And this person at the same time is 20 years old, slender, female, and singing in this very light way about something that doesn't worry her. And like those incredible last scenes in the final scenes of every act in the Da Ponte operas, where you'll have a quartet or a quintet or a sextet of people on stage, all singing totally separately from each other. The one is criticizing, the one is saying, I'm about to get into trouble. The other is saying, oh goodness, help me. There's everything is going on, and we recognize it, that scene of everyone's thoughts being very, very different, and yet communicating with each other. And in the quartet, we were looking for these voices, and someone said, and I was so glad they said this, they said, I can't play like that, it doesn't feel true to me. Now, on the face of it, that is something morally so wonderful, the idea of being true to yourself. But ask yourself the question, does Mozart know? Does he care? And is it maybe a problem that you need to address? If you can't pretend to be 45 years old, fat and slightly drunk, well, get to work. If you can't pretend to be a countess, the all-seeing countess, she's the wisest one of the opera, she knows that he will be unfaithful again. She knows he will apologize again. She knows exactly what's going on. And if you can't imagine being that, then maybe it's your problem. Don't neutralize or neuter your performance. So, why are we talking about that? I think that's, again, this another aspect of being in rehearsal, where understanding objectively, maybe I have some limitations, and maybe I'm stuck in my comfort zone, but actually, my God, this piece is up there, and I need to climb up there. I need to do something. So that's also something to bear in mind when we're experiencing these pieces for the first time. So, as I say, I wanted to spend a bit of time reminding ourselves why we do this, the glories of this incredible music, how it can help us enjoy a more interesting life, of feeling like every character under the sun, feeling like proud, wonderful, worthy individuals, full of love, full of anger, full of everything, from the sublime to the ridiculous. And that the battle is worth fighting, that are we siblings in a quartet? Are we married? Do we love each other? Do we hate each other? Yes. Everything. Do we have sympathy for each other? Yes. And so that journey, the awareness of this journey as exactly that, a journey gathering, strengthening, accepting, is an incredible. We're so lucky to be part of this. So try and hold on to it for dear life. And I think the idealism that you hopefully feel, not too practical, but very idealistic, when you're at your age, is going to glow within you and get you through difficult times later on. You have to be idealistic, otherwise there's nothing. When things do get difficult, it's very easy to ask, well, why am I doing this actually? So at this age where you are, it's the time to be so bursting with love for what we do, an obsession, and that will carry you later on. Gosh. Okay, lovely to be with you, and I'll hear a lot of you tomorrow, I hope. Great.